Every time you tune in to 702,
you're not just listening,
you're making a difference.
We turn words into actions that change communities
and bring us closer to the South Africa we want to be. Every step counts.
So keep walking with us.
702.
Let's walk the talk.
Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app, DSTV channel 856
and 92.7 and 106 FM.
Follow 702 on X
at Radio 702.
All right, it's 25 minutes now before 11 o'clock. Let's have a conversation now about Pope Francis and his legacy within the Catholic Church. And I'd like you to join this chat, whether you are a Catholic yourself or not. What have you observed about Pope Francis and how do you assess his legacy? Remember, on Easter Monday, the Vatican announced that the death of Pope Francis happened, as he was, 88. So the announcement of his death happened on that Monday. Francis leaves behind what we often describe as a complex legacy, right? And I think, in fact, everyone's legacy is complex. When people die, whether you like it or not, there are going to be contradictions around their legacy. But Pope Francis, when you look at how he has served the Catholic Church, he offered a more progressive, public Catholicism, but for the most part, his efforts annoyed conservatives. There are some liberals that were satisfied with his efforts, but there are some that were also disappointed. But he was forced to sort of dilute his declaration of same-sex blessings under pressure from some outraged bishops. So there's a lot that's happened, and I just want us to take this time to look at that legacy, whether you perhaps are still embracing the conservative values in the Catholic Church, or if you're more of a progressive Catholic. What do you think of how he's led the church? You can give us a call on 011-883-0702. The WhatsApp line is 072-702-1702. Father Mike Deeb joins us now on the line, in fact, via Zoom. Father Deeb, thank you so much for making time. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement. Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for making time. I think this entire week we've just been reflecting on the death of Pope Francis, and as it would happen with anyone else who was such a significant figure in society, we reflect on their legacy, and there are some people that are always going to look at what's worked. There are some that are going to look at what's not worked. I want us to maybe start off by looking at how the conservatives in the Catholic Church reflected on his time as the leader of the Catholic Church. Because even though you had the world embracing him, he was excellent in uniting the world. But there are those who argue that he also divided some Catholics in the church.
Well, in a way, it's a pity we're starting with the negative things, because I think there are many more positive things, but hopefully we'll come to that. But clearly, anyone who opens windows and doors will always invite a negative reaction. And I think that Pope Francis, in many ways, followed in the footsteps of Pope John the 23rd, who called a Second Vatican Council, which caused dramatic changes in the church, and there was a lot of reaction to that too. So Pope Francis has opened up many doors and windows. A lot of fresh air has been blown through. Some would call it not so fresh. But clearly, whenever you do that, you will always ruffle some feathers. And he did have many enemies, that's clear. But I think that before I go into that, it would be good to just say how much I think he's vastly appreciated by the majority of people, Catholics in the world. Even in the United States, a recent poll showed that over 60% of the Catholics there were very much in favor of him. So there are people who haven't liked some of the things he's done, and clearly what that would boil down to is when you adopt an approach, as he has, of saying compassion and mercy are the most important things, as against just implementing rules in a strict way. You will always find those who want the rules to be implemented in a strict way who won't be too happy with that, because they would call that confusion. They would call that moving away from church teachings, which he never did precisely. But I think that in that context, he did invite negative feelings. The thing that he was most critical of from the beginning of his pontificate was clericalism in the church, which you can define as a priest-focused church where priests have a lot of power and exert it in a way that's often above people. And he was very critical of that, priests and bishops. And he kept saying things like, a pastor needs to smell like his sheep. He needs to be so close to them that he smells like them, not to be high and mighty above them. And this was loved by most people in the church, I would say. But there are those who were very put out by it. I spent 7 years in Rome, and I was struck by how many people hated him precisely for that focus of his, because so many priests and bishops have seen, going to Rome, for example, as a place to go up the hierarchy. Many were very ambitious, and by him criticizing clericalism, in some ways he pulled the rug from under their feet of their ambitions. So many hated him for that, and they still hate him for that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But in fact, he was just wanting to go back to what anyone who's honest about looking at the gospel say that that's what Jesus was all about. So I think that that's probably the main reason why people have been against him, and they've honed in on things that he's done and saying he's creating confusion by not coming out strongly against things. For example, allowing divorced people to be able to receive communion again. There are some that are very opposed to that. They're saying that he's going against church teachings, and they are mobilizing around that. But I must emphasize that a lot of these reactions are also due to a lot of money being put in. Many of his enemies have a lot of money, and there's been massive campaigns even to promote this anti-Francis narrative, because he was always from the beginning for the poor.
Yeah.
He was always for, he was very critical of neoliberal capitalism, of imperialism, of colonialism. So the many people that are benefiting from those things, they saw him as an absolute enemy.
Yeah.
That's why they put a lot of money into countering his narrative.
I mean, one of the things he did was open up, this high level, the high level Vatican offices even to women and lay people, which some people felt sort of contradicts the church's millennia old structure. And I suppose the question I have is, do you think then that he didn't so much change the doctrine of the church, but maybe more so the attitude of the church towards a more inclusive stance? And how different is that to some of the Pope that we have seen before him? Because it's almost like every Pope who comes sort of has their own vision of the church. So how different was this from those that have come before him?
Well, there was quite a big difference, especially from the last two popes. He was quite in line with the two popes before them, Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul the 6th. In many ways, Francis was following in their direction. But Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict, they were more focused on the rules, on the laws, and they were quite strict about those sorts of things. So he he definitely I wouldn't say he departed from them. He built on them. He built on what they were saying, but with an emphasis on compassion and mercy, and that was the key thing that one needs to take from his pontificate. And coming back to the way you started that question, that meant, for example, making the church much more place for everyone. And that's why his big focus in the last 3 years has been on developing what he calls a synodal church, or synodal church, meaning a church which is inclusive of everyone, where everyone has a voice and a place. And so he's organized these 2 big meetings in the last 2 years in Rome with representatives of all aspects of all different sectors of the church, where they could talk about what sort of church they wanted. And we, in the middle, it's going to be a long journey. He started the process to make everyone feel at home in the church. And of course, that goes against those who have an understanding of church as being a very strictly hierarchical structure where decisions are just made by the men at the top. And when Pope Francis allowed in more women and other people who were even people of other faiths to be part of that conversation, they didn't feel comfortable with that because it contradicted the understanding of what church means in terms of hierarchy. But Francis was redefining what the understanding of church hierarchy means. And it doesn't mean a power thing, it means a ministry thing. And but to allow everyone to have a full voice in determining where the church is going. And those with power mostly, and all men, of course, wouldn't feel comfortable, therefore, with women coming into those spaces, and they would resist that, as many are doing. But I think that Pope Francis has started a process now that hopefully won't be very easily reversible, but would enable more and more people to feel that they're part of the church. The church is not just the priests and the bishops up there, but it's all of us.
Yeah. I'm going to take your calls at 011-883-0702. Your WhatsApp's on 072-702-1702. We're reflecting on the legacy of Pope Francis within the Catholic Church, particularly just those the issues of contradiction in that legacy, because for some ultra-right conservatives, there are some who were not satisfied with some of his attempts, but the more progressive liberal Catholics were quite satisfied with how he has led the Catholic Church. And we've just been reflecting on just that duality, the contradiction in that legacy. After the break, I'm going to bring in Professor Itumeleng Mothoagae, who's going to join this chat together with Father Mike Deeb. But I'm also going to take your calls and WhatsApps as well. If you've got questions as well, feel free to send them through. It's 12 minutes before 11.
Words have tremendous power.
At 7:02, we use ours to inform,
Connect and spark real change. But we can't do it alone.
so join the conversation,
Add your voice.
and together we'll turn words into meaningful action. 7:02.
Let's walk the talk. Streaming countrywide on the Prime Media Plus app, DSTV channel 856.
And 92.7 and 106 FM. 7:02.
The Clement Manyathela Show.
Let's walk the talk.
10 minutes before 11 o'clock, we're reflecting on the legacy of Pope Francis within the Catholic Church. We've been speaking to Father Mike Deeb. I want to bring in now Professor Itumeleng Mothoagae, who is the chair, of the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies at UNISA and Catholic Theologian, joining us now on the line. Professor Mothoagae, thank you for joining this chat as well. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you, Clement, and good morning to my brother Catholic father.
What form did the liberation theology sort of take? Because this is, Pope Francis, who was quite strong and had a strong stance on liberation theology, something that some have argued that even the previous popes, tried to block, they tried to even put ultra-conservative bishops to try and dismantle. But when you look at what he's done, the views he's had on same-sex couples, or how he's made it easier for divorced and remarried Catholics to participate in the church, that irritated some conservative Catholics.
Oh, yes, of course. And Clement, I want to start here that, the liberation theology, which we call the Catholic liberation theology, which is mostly influenced from South America, and its essence is about what is happening on the ground. What is Christ saying to the through the people, and how do we as theologians have to translate that into a social teaching of the church, and so on and so on, and that's exactly that he had that influence. That influence was not only through the reading of liberation theology of Sobrino and so on, but also that he experienced it. He lived amongst the people, so he understood what it means to be excluded. So the exclusion is not only the exclusion on the basis of your identity, but also the exclusion in the terms of the social economic stratus of the country, where those that are poor are led to the margins, and living in squalors and so on and so on. So obviously, those that were in what called the ultra conservatives who see this liberation theology as a threat to the doctrine of the church, without seeing it as actually an accompaniment, an expression of the Catholic social teachings of the church. Because you go to the Catholic social teachings of the church, they explicitly give you what is it that it means for the church to be involved in society. And I think for me, Pope Francis lived the social teachings of the church, and he tried in the best way that he could as a human being to be able to express the very teachings of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, so some of the liberation theologians, if you will, though, were disappointed with how he responded to the sexual abuse allegations, sexual abuse of children allegations within the Catholic Church. They just felt that it took long to respond to that. There are some that were not satisfied with how he failed to recognize the issue of sovereignty of Ukraine when he was praying for the war to end in Ukraine, because he was speaking of peace. And some people felt, he ignored that Russia is not interested in peace, but is interested in conquest. So it appears like even among the liberation theologians, if you will, there are still some that were still not satisfied with how he was addressing some issues, which I imagine is normal with any leader.
Yes, and here, yes, the other aspect that I want to bring about Pope Francis is that as much as he is and regarded as a spiritual leader, but he is also a political leader. And as a political leader, he needs to. That is why we say he occupies the seat, the Holy See. In other words, the Holy See is a political space, is a government on its own, and therefore he needed to be able to maneuver around. What are the things that I speak about? What are the things that I raise, but I do not cause any further damage and so on, like any other president of a country will have to do. And so he always found himself in a dichotomy of being a spiritual leader, but also being a political leader of an institution called the Catholic Church, which is an independent state on its own. So that's one of the things that he needed to maneuver around. And so, of course, we would expect him to be able to speak up about a whole lot of things, But there are certain things as a leader that you choose as central, and you want to amplify those things to make sure that those are the things that people are able to understand and hear about. And we like it or not, the issues around the people in the margins, the issues around those people that are in the margins are a number of them. It's a whole stratification of them. There's not even a single way in which we can say these are the people in the margin. Yeah. But him pushing for that was, I think, also making also in a way to say Ukraine, it is in the margin. It is in the margin. But how do we, engage with the powers that be? Because
got it. Let me go to Kustas now, who's called us from on Midrand, has got a question. Kustas, go ahead. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Clement. Yeah, Clement, thank you, man, for this conversation. It's been absolutely fascinating. I've been watching the two camps between the ultra-conservatives and the liberal talking about the legacy of the Pope. But here's the question I want to ask Father Dean there. In light of the fact that he appointed 80% of the current cardinals who are going to be voting in the next Pope, who is most likely then to emerge out of that conclave? Would it be a case where they turn the path of no longer going via liberalism or going back to conservatism? Who amongst these camps has got a powerful voice and most likely to shape the appointment of the next Pope? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that question. Father Deeb?
I think the important thing about all Francis' appointments is that he broadened the geographic area of those that he was bringing in, and his criteria for choosing them was largely people who he regarded as pastors. They don't all necessarily agree with him ideologically, but they come from different parts of the world, places that many people have never even heard of, and he's wanting to give them a place in the central part of the Roman structure. So I think that by bringing them in some ways, it's making the church and the leadership and the eventual election a more universal sort of election. Obviously, the fact that he appointed them means is at a certain level, if he believes that they are good pastors, he would obviously have his own criteria for determining that. And I think, but if you look at all the different people he's appointed, there's a great diversity amongst them. They don't all think exactly like him, and they wouldn't necessarily do exactly like him. But I think that they would be, if they are more people with a pastoral approach, they're more likely to be more open to choosing who they really believe God's calling them to choose when they get into the election, into the conclave. But you never know what is in people's minds and thoughts. But so we just hope and pray that through him having broadened the scope or the composition of the cardinals, that it will be a decision about a future pope that will be more representative of the whole world, we hope.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Thank you to you, Father Mike Deeb, and to you, Professor Itumeleng Mothoagae, for joining us for this conversation. It's now 11 o'clock.
Politics isn't just about policies and power plays. It's about people. It's about you. I'm TD Madia, and on Politricking, we go beyond the headlines. From interviews with politicians to the voices shaping our society, we break down the stories that matter and why they matter to you. Stay informed, stay engaged. Stream Politricking with TD Madia now on primemediaplus.com or on ewn.co.za.